If you ever have to marry a stranger to save your family, pray the stranger isn't hiding the truth. The bells of St. Augustine Cathedral rang with perfect dignity, but to Ethan Brooks they sounded like the slow countdown to a life he had never chosen. Every guest wore their finest clothes, every camera flashed, every smile looked rehearsed, and every whispered conversation circled around the same humiliation. The groom who was supposed to stand beside him had disappeared less than 2 hours before the ceremony, running away with someone his influential family considered beneath their name. The Brooks family could not survive another public scandal. Their investments were collapsing, creditors were circling like storm clouds, and one canceled political marriage would finish what years of bad decisions had started. So they made a new decision. They chose Ethan, the quiet younger Omega who had spent his entire life cleaning up everyone else's mistakes. No one asked whether he wanted this. His mother only adjusted his tie with trembling hands and whispered that real family meant sacrifice. His uncle reminded him that millions of dollars and hundreds of jobs depended on today's ceremony. His older relatives avoided looking into his eyes altogether. Then the replacement groom arrived. Adrian Hayes stepped through the cathedral doors wearing a plain charcoal suit that looked almost too simple for the occasion. There were no luxury watches, no designer labels, no security team, no expensive car waiting outside. Someone in the crowd laughed quietly and muttered that the Brooks family had traded a powerful alliance for the town fool. Ethan studied the stranger standing across from him. Adrian's dark hair was slightly windswept, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. Instead of looking nervous, embarrassed, or angry, he looked strangely peaceful, as though he had expected every second of this impossible day. During the ceremony, Adrian never once complained about the insults drifting through the pews. He never reacted when distant relatives openly questioned his education, his income, or his future. He simply answered every vow with a calm voice that somehow carried farther than anyone else's. When the officiant declared them legally married, polite applause filled the cathedral, but it felt hollow. Ethan waited for his new husband to demand something, to celebrate, or at least to explain why he had agreed to become the replacement in another man's wedding. Adrian did none of those things. He accepted the marriage certificate, thanked the officiant with quiet sincerity, and walked beside Ethan through a tunnel of forced smiles until they reached the courthouse steps. Outside, reporters shouted questions from behind security barriers. Family members argued over damage control. Financial advisors rushed between black SUVs, while photographers fought for better angles. In the middle of the chaos, Adrian turned toward Ethan for the first time since exchanging vows. His gray eyes were steady, almost comforting. He offered a small smile that didn't match the madness surrounding them. "Let's go home," he said softly. Ethan frowned. "Home?" Adrian nodded once. "Our home." Before Ethan could ask another question, every phone belonging to the Brooks family buzzed at exactly the same moment. Faces that had looked exhausted only seconds earlier suddenly turned pale with disbelief. One executive nearly dropped his tablet. Another stared at his screen as though reality itself had changed. Ethan couldn't see the message, but whatever they had received erased every trace of confidence from the people who had spent the morning calling Adrian worthless. Standing only a few feet away, Adrian remained perfectly calm, slipped his phone back into his pocket without even checking it, and waited patiently for his new husband to decide whether to follow him into a future that suddenly felt far more mysterious than either of them had planned. The drive away from the courthouse was almost painfully ordinary. Instead of a limousine or a convoy of luxury vehicles, Adrian unlocked a modest dark blue pickup truck that had clearly seen years of careful use. Ethan hesitated before climbing inside, unable to reconcile the quiet man beside him with the panic that had spread across his family's faces only minutes earlier. Neither of them spoke for the first several miles. The city skyline slowly disappeared behind them, replaced by neighborhoods lined with maple trees, neighborhood diners, and family-owned hardware stores. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. What was on everyone's phone? Adrian kept his eyes on the road. Business. Ethan laughed once, more from disbelief than amusement. Business that made my uncle look like he had seen a ghost. Adrian simply smiled. Sometimes numbers change faster than people do. That answer explained nothing. 20 minutes later, they turned onto a quiet street where children rode bicycles across wide sidewalks and American flags fluttered from front porches. Adrian parked in front of a small white house with a wraparound porch, flower boxes beneath every window, and an old oak tree shading the front yard. It was clean, welcoming, and surprisingly beautiful without trying to impress anyone. Ethan looked around in confusion. "This is your house." Adrian nodded. "Now it is ours." Inside, everything was neat and thoughtfully arranged. The bookshelves were filled with history, architecture, economics, and classic American novels. The kitchen looked as though someone actually enjoyed cooking rather than showing off expensive appliances. Family photographs, however, were missing. Not a single framed picture decorated the walls. The house felt lived in, yet strangely anonymous. Ethan noticed a chessboard on the coffee table. Half of an unfinished game remained exactly where someone had left it. "Do you play alone?" he asked. Adrian glanced toward the board. Sometimes solving a problem means looking at both sides. Before Ethan could ask another question, Adrian's phone vibrated once. He checked the screen for less than a second before placing it face down on the counter. "Do you need to answer that?" Ethan asked. "It can wait." It sounded important. Adrian poured 2 glasses of iced tea. "The important person is standing in my kitchen." Ethan nearly rolled his eyes. "You barely know me." Adrian handed him a glass. "That can change." Hours passed quietly. Ethan expected awkwardness, but instead there was an almost unsettling sense of calm. Adrian repaired a loose cabinet, hinged without being asked, watered flowers on the porch, and prepared a simple dinner with practiced ease. Nothing about him matched the image of an unemployed drifter everyone had described. He moved with confidence, spoke carefully, and seemed completely unaffected by the enormous consequences of the day's events. Just after sunset, a black luxury sedan slowed in front of the house. Ethan instinctively looked through the window. The expensive vehicle remained parked for several seconds before driving away without anyone getting out. "Were they looking for someone?" Ethan asked. Adrian did not even turn toward the window. "Probably." "Should we be worried?" Adrian shook his head gently. "Not tonight." As darkness settled outside, Ethan stepped onto the porch for fresh air. Across the street, he noticed an elderly neighbor waving enthusiastically. "Good evening, Mr. Hayes," she called with a cheerful smile. "Congratulations on your marriage." Ethan froze. She had not called Adrian by his first name. She had spoken with the quiet respect usually reserved for someone important. Before Ethan could respond, another neighbor walked past with his dog and tipped his cap toward Adrian. "Good to see you back, sir." Ethan slowly turned toward his husband, who stood calmly in the doorway holding 2 mugs of hot coffee, as though nothing unusual had happened at all. For the second time that day, Ethan realized everyone around Adrian seemed to know something he did not. The next morning began with the comforting smell of freshly brewed coffee drifting through the house before sunrise. Ethan had barely slept. Every strange detail from the previous day replayed endlessly in his mind. The mysterious message that had shaken his family, the neighbors who greeted Adrian with quiet respect, and the calm confidence that never seemed to leave his new husband all refused to fit together. When he entered the kitchen, Adrian was already preparing breakfast, wearing a simple gray sweater and reading the local newspaper as though his life had not changed overnight. "Good morning," Adrian said warmly. "I hope you like pancakes." Ethan accepted the plate without taking his eyes off him. "Who exactly are you?" Adrian smiled over his coffee mug. "Your husband." "That is not an answer. It is the only one that matters this morning." Before Ethan could continue, his phone began vibrating repeatedly across the table. The screen filled with messages from relatives who had ignored him for years. His aunt wanted to invite them to dinner. His cousin suddenly wished to apologize for past misunderstandings. Even his uncle, who had spent the wedding treating Adrian like an embarrassment, asked if they could meet immediately to discuss an exciting business opportunity. Ethan frowned. None of it made sense. Then another message arrived, this time from his older sister. It contained only a screenshot of a financial news alert. Brooks Development Group had just received an anonymous emergency investment worth $100 million. The transfer had erased nearly every outstanding debt and prevented the company from declaring bankruptcy. Analysts across the country were calling it one of the most unexpected financial rescues of the year. Ethan stared at the screen in disbelief. "This cannot be real." Adrian quietly continued, eating his breakfast. It looks real enough. Ethan slowly lowered his phone. Someone just saved my family's company. Adrian nodded once. It appears someone did. Who? Adrian reached for the syrup without showing the slightest surprise. Whoever it was probably believed the employees deserved a second chance. Ethan leaned forward. You knew this would happen. Adrian looked up calmly. I hoped it would. You are speaking like none of this surprises you. Adrian only offered the same patient smile that was beginning to frustrate Ethan more than silence itself. The conversation ended when a delivery truck stopped outside the house. A man in a tailored suit stepped onto the porch carrying several neatly wrapped boxes. Ethan expected Adrian to sign for them personally, but instead the visitor greeted him with unmistakable respect. Good morning, Mr. Hayes. Everything has been completed exactly as requested. Adrian thanked him politely before accepting a single envelope. The visitor left without another word. Curious, Ethan watched through the window until the truck disappeared down the street. Who was that? He asked. Someone who keeps promises. Adrian slipped the envelope into a desk drawer without opening it. Later that afternoon, Ethan decided he needed fresh air to clear his thoughts. He walked into the small downtown district where nearly every shop owner seemed to recognize Adrian's name. The elderly woman running the bookstore smiled brightly when Ethan mentioned where he was staying. You married a remarkable man, she said. Our library still exists because of him. At the family-owned diner, the owner refused to let Ethan pay for lunch. Mr. Hayes covered every meal for our volunteer firefighters during the winter storms, he explained proudly. He never wanted anyone to know. By the time Ethan returned home, his confusion had only grown deeper. Everyone described Adrian as generous, dependable, and quietly influential, yet no one explained why. As Ethan stepped onto the front porch, he noticed Adrian sitting alone on the swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Resting beside him was an elegant black folder embossed with a silver crest. The folder had been left unopened, but across the front, in bold letters impossible to miss, were the words, Executive Board Meeting, Hayes Global Holdings. The silver crest on the black folder lingered in Ethan's thoughts long after the sun disappeared beyond the trees. He had never heard of Hayes Global Holdings before, yet the name carried an unmistakable weight. Adrian noticed him staring, but made no attempt to hide the folder or explain it. Instead, he closed it gently and set it aside. Dinner is almost ready, he said with the same calm voice that somehow made every mystery feel deliberate. Ethan folded his arms. You expect me to ignore that? Adrian glanced at the folder for a brief moment. No, I expect you to ask when you are ready to hear the answer. I have been asking since yesterday. Adrian smiled faintly. Not the right question. Before Ethan could respond, the peaceful evening was interrupted by the sound of tires stopping outside the house. 3 expensive sport utility vehicles pulled into the driveway one after another. Ethan immediately recognized the first vehicle. It belonged to his uncle, Richard Brooks. The man hurried out before the engine had even stopped, followed by Ethan's aunt, 2 family attorneys, and several executives who had never once acknowledged Ethan during family gatherings unless they needed a favor. Their expressions had completely changed. Gone were the looks of disappointment and embarrassment. Now every face carried nervous optimism. Richard reached the porch first and forced an awkward smile. Ethan, it is wonderful to see you. Ethan stared in disbelief. Yesterday you called my marriage a disaster. Richard laughed uncomfortably. We were all under tremendous stress. Adrian quietly opened the front door before the conversation could become more uncomfortable. Please come inside. The visitors entered the living room, carefully complimenting the house, the neighborhood, and even the fresh flowers by the window. Ethan had never seen his relatives behave with such careful politeness. Richard finally cleared his throat. We came to express our gratitude. Whoever intervened yesterday saved Brooks Development Group. More than 4,000 employees still have jobs because of that anonymous investment. Adrian simply nodded. That is good news. Richard leaned forward. Our legal team has tried to identify the investor, but every trail disappears behind private holding companies. Adrian poured everyone coffee before answering. Perhaps the person values privacy. Richard forced another smile. Perhaps. Ethan remained silent, watching every reaction around the room. His relatives seemed less interested in celebrating the company's recovery than in studying Adrian's every movement. Even the attorneys listened carefully whenever he spoke, as though every ordinary sentence carried hidden meaning. The conversation shifted toward future business plans, charitable projects, and possible partnerships. Adrian contributed only polite observations, never volunteering personal information. Nearly an hour passed before Richard finally stood. "There is one more thing." He removed a thick envelope from his briefcase and placed it on the coffee table. "The board of directors would like to offer you both honorary advisory positions within the company." Ethan looked at the envelope without touching it. Yesterday, these same people had treated him like an inconvenient replacement. Today, they were offering him influence. Adrian glanced at the documents, but made no move to open them. "Thank you," he said. "Ethan will decide for himself." Richard blinked with visible surprise. "You are leaving the decision entirely to him?" Adrian answered without hesitation. "Always." The room fell unexpectedly quiet. Ethan noticed his aunt lowering her eyes, almost ashamed. For the first time in his life, someone had openly trusted his judgment without conditions or expectations. After the visitors finally left, Ethan remained standing beside the unopened envelope. "You knew they would come." Adrian collected the empty coffee cups. "Yes." "Because of the investment?" Adrian placed the last cup into the sink before meeting Ethan's eyes. "Because people often reveal who they truly are after they stop being afraid of losing money." At that exact moment, Adrian's phone rang. He looked at the screen, and for the first time since Ethan had met him, his calm expression shifted ever so slightly. The caller identification displayed only 3 words: Executive Board Chairman. Adrian let the phone ring twice before answering. He did not leave the room or lower his voice. "Good evening," he said calmly. Ethan could only hear one side of the conversation, but the change in Adrian's posture was impossible to miss. The relaxed husband who had spent the past 2 days making breakfast and watering flowers now spoke with quiet authority. "No," Adrian said. "The meeting will proceed as scheduled tomorrow morning. Delay nothing on my account." A brief silence followed. "The quarterly reports can wait. The employee retention plan cannot." Another pause. "I understand. Thank you, William." Adrian ended the call and placed the phone back on the kitchen counter as though nothing unusual had happened. Ethan looked at him carefully. "Who is William?" "An old colleague." The caller identification said, "Executive Board Chairman." Adrian nodded once. "It did. You expect me to believe the chairman of a major corporation calls you at home just to discuss ordinary business?" Adrian gave a small smile. Most business becomes ordinary after enough years. Before Ethan could continue, another notification appeared on his own phone. Every major financial network was broadcasting the same headline. Hayes Global Holdings had announced an emergency executive meeting for the following morning. Analysts described the company as one of the most influential investment groups in the country, with interests ranging from technology and renewable energy to healthcare and commercial real estate. Ethan opened article after article, searching for photographs of the leadership team. Surprisingly, the current chief executive officer was never shown. Every report referred to the executive as intensely private, rarely photographed, and almost never interviewed. "That is strange," Ethan murmured. Adrian began rinsing the coffee cups. Some people prefer their work to speak for them. The next morning, Adrian prepared breakfast exactly as he had the day before. Nothing about his routine suggested he was connected to one of the largest corporations in America. After breakfast, he changed into a crisp navy suit that fit him perfectly without appearing flashy. Ethan had never seen him wear anything so formal. "You are going somewhere important," Ethan observed. Adrian adjusted his cufflinks with an easy smile. "Just a meeting." "The executive meeting?" Adrian looked at him for a moment before answering. "Yes." Ethan's heart skipped. "You actually work for Hayes Global Holdings." Adrian picked up a simple leather briefcase. "I do." "Doing what?" Adrian opened the front door and glanced back over his shoulder. "Helping people make better decisions." Before Ethan could ask another question, a long black sedan stopped neatly in front of the house. It was followed by 2 more identical vehicles. Uniformed drivers stepped out at the same time, yet none of them rushed or acted dramatically. One approached the porch and greeted Adrian with respectful professionalism. "Good morning, sir. The board members have all arrived." Adrian thanked him quietly before turning back toward Ethan. "Would you like to come with me?" Ethan blinked in surprise. "Me? You have every right to know the truth." The drive into downtown was almost completely silent. Instead of entering the public parking garage, the convoy passed through a private security gate beneath an enormous glass tower that reflected the morning sunlight across the entire business district. Employees crossing the plaza instinctively stepped aside as the vehicles approached, not out of fear, but out of respect. When Ethan stepped from the car, he looked up at the polished steel letters mounted above the entrance. Hayes Global Holdings stretched across the building in unmistakable silver lettering. Before he could gather his thoughts, the revolving doors opened automatically. More than 50 executives waiting inside stood simultaneously, and in one perfectly coordinated voice, they greeted the man beside him. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes. The board is ready for you." For a long moment, Ethan could not move. Every executive remained standing in complete silence, their attention focused entirely on Adrian. The man who had quietly repaired cabinet hinges, cooked breakfast, and driven an aging pickup truck now walked through the lobby with the natural confidence of someone who belonged there. Adrian acknowledged each greeting with a polite nod before turning toward Ethan. "Come with me." Ethan followed in stunned silence as they entered a private elevator reserved for executive leadership. The doors closed, sealing them away from the bustling lobby below. "You are the chief executive officer," Ethan finally whispered. Adrian looked at the illuminated floor numbers before answering. "Yes." Ethan searched his face for some sign that this was another misunderstanding, but there was none. "Why did you let everyone believe you were just an ordinary man?" Adrian smiled gently. "Because titles introduce power before they introduce people. I wanted at least one part of my life to begin with honesty instead of reputation." The elevator opened onto the top floor where an expansive conference room overlooked the entire city. Around a polished walnut table sat directors representing every division of Hayes Global Holdings. As Adrian entered, each person rose once again. Ethan quietly took a seat near the back, unsure whether he even belonged in the room. The meeting began immediately. Instead of discussing prestige or profits, Adrian focused on employee benefits, disaster relief funding, scholarship programs, and long-term investments that would protect workers during uncertain economic conditions. Every decision reflected patience rather than ego. Ethan watched board members challenge proposals, ask difficult questions, and present complicated reports, yet Adrian answered every concern with remarkable clarity. There was no arrogance in his leadership, only confidence earned through preparation. Nearly 2 hours later, the meeting paused for a short break. Ethan stepped into the hallway, still trying to process everything he had witnessed. Before he could collect his thoughts, 2 senior executives standing nearby lowered their voices, unaware that he could hear them. "The market reacted exactly as expected after the Brooks investment," one of them said. The chairman was right. Protecting that company prevented thousands of layoffs. The other nodded. Mr. Hayes made the decision in less than 5 minutes after receiving the wedding report. Ethan froze. Wedding report. They were talking about his wedding. Before he could think further, a woman in a tailored business suit approached him with a warm smile. "You must be Ethan." "Yes. I am Laura Bennett, executive assistant to Mr. Hayes. He asked me to make sure you were comfortable today." Ethan hesitated before asking the question that had been growing in his mind since entering the building. "Did Adrian really authorize that investment because of my family?" Laura considered her answer carefully. "Mr. Hayes never allows personal feelings to decide business matters. He approved the investment because thousands of innocent employees deserved stability. Your family simply happened to own the company." Ethan looked back toward the conference room doors. The answer somehow made Adrian's actions even more impressive. "Just." Then a security director hurried down the hallway carrying a digital tablet. His composed expression had noticeably changed. "Mr. Hayes needs to see this immediately," he said. Laura accepted the tablet, her eyes narrowing as she read the report. Ethan could only glimpse a few words before the screen turned away. Anonymous acquisition. Confidential shareholder activity. Emergency response. Laura immediately entered the conference room. Seconds later, Adrian stepped outside. He read the report without changing his expression, then calmly handed the tablet back. "Prepare the legal team," he said. "No public statements until we verify every detail." Ethan noticed something he had not seen before. This was the first problem Adrian could not solve with a quiet smile alone. As they walked back toward the conference room together, Adrian looked at Ethan with reassuring calm despite the urgency surrounding them. Our peaceful beginning may become more complicated than I hoped. The executive meeting ended later that afternoon, but the calm atmosphere that had filled the conference room was gone. Small groups of board members quietly discussed legal strategies, while financial analysts moved quickly between offices carrying reports and tablets. Ethan remained beside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, trying to understand how his life had changed in less than a week. Adrian approached with 2 cups of coffee and handed one to him. "I am sorry today became more complicated than either of us expected," he said. Ethan accepted the cup and looked at him carefully. "You apologized because your company has a problem. Most people in your position would apologize because I discovered they were secretly running a corporation." Adrian laughed softly for the first time all day. "I suppose I still owe you that explanation." Before he could continue, Laura Bennett entered with another folder. "The media has started asking questions," she said. "Reporters noticed your arrival together this morning. They are trying to identify Mr. Brooks." Adrian read the briefing without any visible concern. "Do not release anything yet. Ethan deserves privacy until he chooses. Otherwise." Laura nodded respectfully and left. Ethan looked at Adrian with growing disbelief. "You keep asking everyone what I want instead of deciding for me." Adrian answered without hesitation. "Because too many people have already made choices on your behalf." Those words lingered in Ethan's mind long after they left the headquarters. On the drive home, Adrian chose the same quiet streets instead of the faster highway. The familiar pickup truck was waiting exactly where they had left it that morning, as though the luxury convoy had never existed. Ethan smiled to himself. "You really prefer driving this truck, do not you?" Adrian rested his hand on the steering wheel. "My father bought it when I graduated from college. It still runs perfectly. I never saw a reason to replace it." Ethan realized that nothing about Adrian's simple lifestyle had ever been an act. The modest house, the ordinary clothes, the neighborhood, and even the pickup truck reflected genuine personal choices rather than an elaborate disguise. When they arrived home, another surprise was waiting on the front porch. Richard Brooks stood there alone, holding no briefcase this time, only a neatly wrapped homemade pie. His confident business demeanor had disappeared completely. "May I come in?" he asked quietly. Ethan hesitated before opening the door. Richard remained standing in the living room, looking noticeably uncomfortable. "I owe both of you an apology," he began. "Especially you, Ethan. I spent years treating you like someone whose only purpose was fixing other people's mistakes." Ethan listened silently. Richard continued. "I judged Adrian without knowing anything about him. That was my failure, not yours." Adrian thanked him politely, but said nothing more. Richard finally turned toward Ethan. "Whether you ever forgive me is your decision. I simply wanted you to hear those words directly from me." After Richard left, the house became quiet again. Ethan stood by the front window, watching his uncle slowly walk back to his car. "I never imagined he would apologize," Ethan admitted. Adrian placed another log into the fireplace as evening settled outside. Sometimes people change when they finally see the consequences of their choices. Ethan looked at the man he had married only days earlier and realized something far more important than Adrian's wealth had been hidden from him. It was his character. The fortune explained the respect of strangers, but kindness explained why they remained loyal. Just as Ethan was about to say that aloud, Adrian's phone vibrated once. He read the message, then looked toward the darkening sky outside the window. "It seems our next visitor is already on the way," he said quietly. "This time, it is someone who has no interest in apologizing." Less than 30 minutes later, another black sedan stopped in front of the house. Unlike the respectful visitors who had come before, only one person stepped out. He was dressed in an expensive tailored suit and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to winning negotiations before they began. Adrian looked through the front window and quietly sighed. "His name is Victor Langford," he said. "He leads Langford Capital." Ethan recognized the name immediately. It was one of the largest investment firms in the country and one of the few companies often compared with Hayes Global Holdings in financial news. Adrian opened the door before Victor could knock. "Good evening," Adrian greeted politely. Victor smiled, but the expression never reached his eyes. "Congratulations on your marriage." Adrian invited him inside, and the 3 men sat around the dining table where Ethan had shared breakfast only hours earlier. Victor placed a slim folder on the table. I will be direct. Investors have noticed unexpected changes inside Brooks Development Group. They have also noticed your personal involvement. Adrian folded his hands calmly. Go on. Victor slid the folder across the table. Sell us your interest in Brooks Development Group. We are prepared to offer an exceptionally generous price. Ethan looked toward Adrian in surprise. You own part of my family's company? Adrian answered honestly. A temporary controlling interest, enough to stabilize operations until the employees are protected. Victor nodded. Exactly. You achieved your objective. Now let us take over. Adrian never reached for the folder. No. Victor remained composed. You have not even heard the offer. The answer is still no. For several quiet seconds, neither man spoke. Ethan sensed they were discussing far more than a single business transaction. Finally, Victor leaned back in his chair. You have always made decisions with your heart before your balance sheet. Adrian smiled faintly. And you have always believed those two things cannot exist together. Victor stood, collecting the unopened folder. Then I hope you understand that others will continue trying to acquire Brooks Development Group. Not everyone shares your patience. Adrian walked him to the front door. I expected nothing less. After the sedan disappeared down the street, Ethan turned toward Adrian. Was he threatening you? Adrian shook his head. No. He was reminding me that every important decision attracts attention. Ethan sat quietly for a moment before asking the question that had been growing in his heart since the morning. Why did you really hide who you were? Adrian remained silent long enough that Ethan wondered if he would answer at all. Finally, he walked onto the porch, where the evening breeze gently moved the oak tree above them. Ethan joined him. Adrian looked across the peaceful neighborhood before speaking. When my father built this company, he taught me that success should expand your choices, not define your identity. After he passed away, every introduction began with my title instead of my name. People admired the office, the reputation, or the influence before they ever knew me. He looked at Ethan with complete honesty. When your family announced they needed someone to replace the missing groom, I realized I had one chance to meet someone without any of those barriers. I did not expect gratitude. I certainly did not expect trust. I simply wanted one relationship that began with the truth of character instead of the weight of wealth. Ethan felt every misunderstanding from the past week quietly fall away. Adrian had never hidden behind his fortune. He had hidden from it. As the porch light illuminated the quiet evening around them, Ethan smiled for the first time without confusion or doubt. Then maybe our marriage did not begin at the courthouse after all, he said softly. Adrian returned the smile. Perhaps it begins tonight. 1 month later, the small white house looked exactly the same from the outside, yet everything inside had changed. The mornings still began with fresh coffee, homemade breakfasts, and quiet conversations before work, but now Ethan no longer questioned who Adrian truly was. He had seen the boardroom, the responsibility, and the difficult decisions hidden behind the calm smile that had first welcomed him on the courthouse steps. More importantly, he had learned that none of those accomplishments mattered as much to Adrian as the peaceful life they were building together. Brooks Development Group gradually recovered under its new leadership. Instead of selling the company for quick profit, Adrian appointed an experienced management team and created an employee ownership program that rewarded the people who had stayed loyal through the hardest months. Thousands of families kept their jobs, local businesses regained confidence, and the company slowly became stronger than it had ever been before. Richard Brooks continued visiting the house from time to time, never asking for favors and never arriving with business proposals. He came simply to rebuild the relationship he had nearly destroyed. Trust returned slowly, one honest conversation at a time, and Ethan appreciated that genuine change required patience instead of promises. One Saturday afternoon, Adrian surprised Ethan with a short drive into the countryside. They arrived at a quiet lakeside garden where white flowers lined a stone pathway leading toward a wooden gazebo overlooking the water. There were no reporters, no executives, no board members, and no expensive displays of wealth. Only a few close friends, several grateful employees, and the elderly neighbors who had always known Adrian as the kind man next door. Ethan looked around in confusion. What is all this? Adrian smiled with the same warmth that had first eased Ethan's fears. Our first wedding saved a family business. I thought we deserved one that celebrated a family. Instead, From his jacket pocket, Adrian removed a small velvet box, not containing extravagant jewelry, but two simple matching wedding bands crafted from brushed platinum. He stood before Ethan with quiet sincerity. The first time we stood together, neither of us truly had a choice. Today I do. He took a slow breath before continuing. Ethan Brooks, will you choose this life with me because it is the one you want? Ethan felt his eyes fill with grateful tears, not because of the beautiful setting or the heartfelt words, but because someone had finally given him the freedom to decide his own future. He smiled through quiet emotion and answered without hesitation. Yes, every day, and not because of your company, your success, or your name. I choose the man who made breakfast before board meetings, who protected strangers before prophets, and who believed I deserved a voice even when I had forgotten it myself. As they exchanged rings beneath the afternoon sunlight, gentle applause echoed across the lakeshore. The ceremony lasted only a few minutes, yet it felt more meaningful than the grand wedding that had brought them together weeks earlier. Later that evening, as they drove home in the same aging pickup truck, Ethan rested comfortably beside the man the world admired as an extraordinary business leader, but whom he simply knew as his husband. Adrian glanced toward him with an easy smile. Ready to go home? Ethan looked out at the familiar neighborhood waiting ahead, then back at the person who had quietly transformed every definition of home he had ever known. We already are, he answered, and for the first time since fate had unexpectedly brought their lives together, the future no longer felt uncertain. It simply felt right.